I'm Allison Parker, 34, standing in the glittering ballroom of my father Richard's $2 million company anniversary celebration. My heart pounds as he calls me his useless daughter who couldn't even handle a simple job in the family business. The crowd erupts in laughter, including Victoria, my stepmother, and her perfect children. With surprising steadiness, I approach the microphone. For 3 years, I've kept my secret. I own 31% of Parker Enterprises, more than anyone else in this room. Before I dive into how this all unfolded, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story ends. My father, Richard Parker, built Parker Enterprises from scratch, or at least that's the story he tells at every opportunity. A self-made business tycoon who transformed a small investment into a multi-million-dollar corporation. Growing up, I rarely saw him. He was always at the office, building his empire, while my mother Sarah raised me in our two-big house that never quite felt like a home. When Mom died of cancer when I was 14, something in Dad broke. He buried himself even deeper in his work. I became the girl who ate dinner alone, who attended school functions without parents, who learned to forge her father's signature on permission slips. For 2 years, it was just us, or rather, just me, as Dad was merely a ghost who occasionally appeared at breakfast. Then came Victoria, tall, elegant, with a honeyed voice and calculated charm. She was 20 years younger than Dad, with 2 children from her previous marriage, James, 17, and Rebecca, 15. Dad married her after a whirlwind 6-month courtship. Suddenly, I had a complete family again. From the beginning, Victoria was warmth and smiles in Dad's presence, cold calculation in his absence. "Your father works so hard," she would say, hand on my shoulder, nails digging in just enough. We wouldn't want to burden him with trivial problems. Trivial problems meant anything concerning me. I tried everything to maintain my connection with Dad. I studied business in college because that's what he respected. I graduated with honors, hoping he'd notice. He attended my graduation for exactly 45 minutes before being pulled away by an urgent call. Victoria assured everyone it was critical business, while James and Rebecca exchanged knowing smirks. When I turned 22, I finally achieved what had been working toward a position at Parker Enterprises. Not because Dad offered it, but because I applied through proper channels and aced the interviews. Human Resources hired me before Dad even realized I had applied. He was displeased but couldn't object without revealing his bias. "Just don't expect special treatment," he warned. I never did. In fact, I worked twice as hard as anyone else, arriving first, leaving last, taking on the projects nobody wanted. 6 months into my role as junior marketing strategist, I landed the opportunity to present a campaign for North Star Technologies, a potential client that could increase our annual revenue by 20%. I spent weeks preparing, researching their market, creating a comprehensive strategy. The night before the presentation, I stayed until midnight, reviewing every slide, every number. The boardroom was packed the next morning. Dad sat at the head of the table, Victoria beside him to observe how the business operates. James, who had been hired as Dad's executive assistant despite having no qualifications, sat on Dad's other side. I was halfway through my presentation when the CFO interrupted. "These projections can't be right," he said, frowning at his printout. "According to this, we'd be operating at a loss for the first 2 quarters. My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. My projections show a 15% profit margin from the start." Dad jabbed his finger at the screen. "It's right there in your own slides, Allison. Negative returns until month 7. Did you even check your work?" I stared at the numbers, my vision blurring. These weren't my figures. Someone had altered my presentation. Later, I found a deleted email in the server logs. James had accessed my files at 5:30 a.m., hours before the meeting. When confronted privately, he gave a practiced look of confusion. "Maybe you made a calculation error. It happens to people who aren't naturally suited for business." Dad's disappointment was public and brutal. "I expected better," he announced in front of the entire marketing department. "This is why nepotism is dangerous. It puts unqualified people in positions they can't handle." Victoria found me in the bathroom, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy while her eyes remained cold. "Perhaps this is a sign that you should find your path elsewhere. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world." As she left, I heard her whisper to Rebecca in the hallway, "One down, two to go." That night, I almost quit. Instead, I dried my tears and made a promise to myself. I would not be driven out of my own family's company. I would prove myself, despite them, despite all of them. The North Star Technologies disaster was just the beginning. I rebuilt my reputation slowly, taking on smaller projects, triple-checking everything, creating backup files stored on personal drives. For a while, it seemed to work. I delivered results, earned the respect of my colleagues, and started to feel like I belonged at Parker Enterprises. That's when the systematic dismantling of my career began in earnest. Rebecca, who had been hired as the company's events coordinator despite her only qualification being throwing great parties, became the company gossip pipeline. Her specialty was the casual character assassination disguised as concern. "Allison's working so hard on the Bennett proposal," she would say loud enough for others to hear. "Let's hope she doesn't mess up the numbers again like with North Star." Or, "Dad had to personally review her work on the Williams account. She's lucky to have such a patient father." Small things started happening. Files would go missing from my computer, emails I'd sent apparently never arrived. Meetings I was supposed to attend were rescheduled without notifying me. 6 months after the North Star incident, I landed another major opportunity, developing a proposal for Redwood Pharmaceuticals, a client worth potentially 8 figures in annual business. I worked on it for weeks, even bringing in Rachel Chen, a quiet but brilliant accountant, to verify all financial projections. The night before the presentation, I left my completed proposal on my desk, ready for the morning meeting. Victoria stopped by my office as I was packing up. "Still here so late?" "You're certainly dedicated," she said, leaning against my doorframe. "Your father wanted me to remind you about dinner with the Hendersons on Friday." I barely registered the message, focused on mentally rehearsing my presentation. After she left, I did one final check of my proposal before heading home. The next morning, I arrived to find my proposal gone. Not just the printed copy, the digital file had been deleted from my computer and the shared drive. The backup on my USB drive was corrupted. Victoria appeared at my door with a look of exaggerated horror. "Oh no! Did you lose your presentation? I accidentally brushed against your keyboard when I was in your office last night." "I hope I didn't delete anything. The presentation was a disaster." I cobbled together what I could remember, but without the detailed financial analysis and market research, it fell flat. Dad was furious. "This is beyond unprofessional," he fumed afterward. Redwood was considering a 10-year contract. "Do you have any idea what you've cost this company?" James suggested that perhaps I wasn't ready for client-facing roles. Rebecca wondered aloud if I might be happier in administration. Victoria said nothing, but her smile told me everything. 3 weeks later, while reviewing quarterly reports, I noticed financial irregularities. Funds were being allocated to projects that didn't exist or had been completed months ago. When I dug deeper, I found a pattern of misappropriated money, all authorized with James' signature. I brought my concerns directly to Dad, showing him the documentation he'd gathered. "These don't match our official reports," I explained. "Someone's creating phantom projects." Instead of concern, his face hardened with anger. "Are you accusing your brother of embezzlement?" "He's not my brother," I corrected automatically, "and am not accusing anyone. I'm showing you a discrepancy that needs investigation." "I know what you're doing, Allison," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're trying to distract from your own failures by casting suspicion on James. It's pathetic and transparent." The next day, I found my office vandalized. My files were scattered, my computer screen cracked, and several important documents missing. When I requested the security footage, IT informed me that there had been a system error during the night, and no footage was available. Dad's solution was swift and humiliating. "I'm moving you to accounts receivable," he announced. "A position with less responsibility might be better suited to your abilities." The demotion was a clear message: quit or suffer. For the second time, I considered walking away. But something kept me there, a stubborn determination, yes, but also growing suspicion. This wasn't just family drama, something systematic was happening at Parker Enterprises, and I needed to find out what it was. My demotion to accounts receivable felt like professional purgatory. I went from a promising marketing strategist to essentially a collections clerk overnight. My new office was a cubicle in the basement, as far from the executive floor and my father as physically possible within the building. Still, I adapted. I learned the accounting systems, mastered the collections process, and within 3 months, reduced outstanding receivables by 22%. It wasn't the career I wanted, but I was good at it, and for a brief moment, I thought perhaps I'd found a way to peacefully exist within Parker Enterprises. Then came the Weber account. Weber Manufacturing was one of our oldest clients, a family-owned business with a 20-year relationship with Parker Enterprises. They were expanding their operations and needed additional services from our company. Somehow, their account had been transferred to me. James appeared at my cubicle the day before my meeting with Weber's CEO. "Dad wanted me to brief you on the Weber situation," he said, dropping a folder on my desk. "They're expanding their Dallas facility and need logistics support. All the details are in here. Don't screw it up." I spent that night studying the file, preparing for the meeting. The next morning, I met with Thomas Weber in our main conference room. 10 minutes into our discussion, it became clear something was very wrong. "Miss Parker, we're not expanding in Dallas," Mr. Weber said, frowning. "We closed that facility last year. We're expanding in Phoenix." My blood ran cold. "I apologize for the confusion. Let me pull up the correct information," but there was no correct information. The entire brief James had given me was fabricated. I was walking into a crucial client meeting completely unprepared. Mr. Weber's disappointment was palpable. "Your father and I have worked together for 20 years. He assured me you were the right person to handle our account going forward. I see now that was a mistake." The meeting ended abruptly. Weber Manufacturing terminated their contract with Parker Enterprises the next day, $1 million account gone, because of gross incompetence on my part. Dad didn't even wait for me to explain. He summoned me to his office, where Victoria, James, and Rebecca were already waiting, like vultures circling a carcass. "Weber was one of our oldest clients," Dad said, his voice cold with fury. 20 years of business, gone overnight. The information James gave me was completely wrong. I protested. He told me they were expanding in Dallas when they closed that facility last year. James looked shocked. "I gave you the brief directly from Dad's office. If you mixed up the details, that's on you." "This is the final straw, Allison," Dad said. "I've tried to find a place for you in this company, but it's clear you're not fit for any position here." Victoria placed a hand on Dad's arm. "Richard, perhaps we should discuss this as a family." "There's nothing to discuss," he snapped. "Allison, clear out your desk. You're done at Parker Enterprises." The humiliation wasn't over. Dad insisted that I clean out my cubicle immediately, with James supervising to ensure company property is returned. I packed my meager belongings into a cardboard box, while curious employees pretended not to watch. James stood over me, checking items off a list with exaggerated thoroughness. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I heard laughter from the small conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see Victoria, James, and Rebecca celebrating with champagne. Finally getting rid of the spare Parker. James toasted, clinking glasses with Rebecca. Richard was furious, Victoria said, smiling. "I've never seen him so angry. She'll never work in this industry again." "What about her trust fund?" Rebecca asked. "Doesn't she still get Grandma Catherine's money when she turns 35? Victoria's smile turned calculating. "I'm working on that. Once we consolidate Richard's shares with ours, we can vote to dissolve the old trust agreements. By this time next year, there won't be a penny left for her." I stumbled back from the door, nearly dropping my box. They weren't just pushing me out of the company, they were planning to cut me off completely. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the pathetic remnants of my career, rock bottom. I opened a bottle of wine, not bothering with a glass, and began sorting through the box from my desk. At the bottom was a small wooden case I'd kept in my drawer, my mother's keepsake box that I'd brought to the office years ago as a personal touchstone. Inside were photos, her wedding ring, and letters shed written to me before she died. Beneath these was an envelope I'd never opened, addressed to me in my grandmother Catherine's handwriting, with instructions to open it when I needed her most. Grandmother Catherine had died 3 years earlier. My father's mother, she had been a formidable woman who built her own successful business in the 1960s when female entrepreneurs were rare. She and Victoria had detested each other, though both maintained cold civility in Dad's presence. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. "My dearest Allison," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I am gone, and you are in need of guidance. I have watched with growing concern as Victoria's influence over your father has deepened. Richard was always susceptible to flattery, even as a boy. What your father has never publicly acknowledged is that Parker Enterprises began with my money. The small loan he mentions in his success story was, in fact, his inheritance from your grandfather, a substantial sum that I insisted be invested wisely. I fear that Victoria and her children are not what they seem. I have made arrangements to protect your interests, which my lawyer Margaret Winters will explain when the time comes. Until then, be vigilant and remember that you are a Parker by blood and by spirit. That counts for more than your father currently remembers. All my love, Grandmother Catherine." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I picked up my phone and made a call that would change everything. Michael Turner answered on the 3rd ring. "Allison Parker," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "It's been what, 3 years? Since Dad forced you out of the company and pretended you'd never been his partner for 15 years? "Yes, about that long. Michael had been my father's best friend and business partner since before I was born. 3 years ago, Head suddenly retired from Parker Enterprises under mysterious circumstances. Dad refused to discuss it, and Michael disappeared from our lives completely. I need to talk to you," I said, "about Dad, Victoria, and what's happening at Parker Enterprises." We met the next morning at a small cafe 20 miles outside the city. Michael looked older than I remembered, gray streaking his dark hair, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "So," he said after it explained everything, "they finally pushed you out too." "What do you mean, too?" Michael's laugh was bitter. "You didn't really believe I retired at 52 to pursue other interests, did you? Victoria orchestrated my exit the same way she did yours. Different tactics, same result." He explained how Victoria had gradually isolated my father from everyone close to him, including Michael. First, it was subtle private dinners instead of our usual business meals, rescheduled meetings, information that never quite made it to me. Then James started working as Richard's assistant, and suddenly I was out of the loop entirely. The final straw came when financial records were altered to make it look like it'd been skimming from client accounts. Your father believed it without question. 30 years of friendship, gone overnight. The pattern was clear. Victoria was systematically removing anyone who might have influence over my father or pose a threat to her control. "I've been keeping tabs on Parker Enterprises," Michael continued. "There have been unusual movements in the company finances, strange acquisitions, new subsidiaries in offshore locations, classic signs of asset stripping and fund diversion. We need proof," I said. "Hard evidence that shows what they're doing." Michael nodded. "I still have contacts in the industry. People who owe me favors. But, well, need someone inside Parker Enterprises." The next day, I received a text from an unknown number. "Coffee? Rachel C." Rachel Chen, the quiet accountant who had helped me with the Redwood proposal, was waiting at a corner table in a busy coffee shop. She glanced nervously around before speaking. "I saw what happened with the Weber account," she said quietly. "Those weren't your notes. I was asked to prepare the actual brief for Weber, and it definitely mentioned Phoenix, not Dallas. You believe me?" She nodded. "I've noticed irregularities in the accounts for months now. Discrepancies in the reports James submits versus the actual numbers. Funds being moved through subsidiaries that don't seem to do anything. Why are you telling me this?" "Because your grandmother was kind to me," she said simply. "When I first started at Parker Enterprises, I made a calculation error that could have cost the company thousands. Catherine Parker was interim CFO then. She caught the mistake and corrected it privately, saving me from embarrassment. She said everyone deserves a second chance. With Rachel's help, We began mapping the financial labyrinth Victoria and James had created. Rachel copied financial records, Michael analyzed unusual business transactions, and I compiled everything we found. The picture that emerged was worse than we imagined. James had been embezzling company funds for years, siphoning money into personal accounts disguised as vendor payments. Rebecca was on the payroll of 3 different departments, collecting multiple salaries for positions that required little to no work. But Victoria's scheme was far more sophisticated. She had created a network of shell companies that were systematically acquiring Parker Enterprises' assets at below-market rates. Company properties, patents, even client contracts were being transferred to entities ultimately controlled by Victoria. Most alarming was the discovery about company shares. Victoria had been quietly purchasing shares from minor stockholders, consolidating her position. Combined with James and Rebecca's shares gifts from my father, they were approaching majority control. If they get majority control, Michael warned, they can vote to dissolve the original company structure completely. Your father would be left with nothing but the title on his office door. One evening, while searching for additional evidence, I nearly collided with Rebecca as I was photographing documents in my father's home office. I'd used my old house key to enter when I knew they would be at a charity event, but Rebecca had returned unexpectedly to retrieve a forgotten purse. I barely managed to hide in the adjoining bathroom before she entered the office, heart pounding so loudly I was certain she would hear it. After what seemed like an eternity, she left, and I escaped through a side door, clutching the documents that would later prove crucial to our case. We were building a solid file of evidence, but time was running out. According to Rachel, Victoria's plan was accelerating. 6 weeks into our investigation, Victoria became suspicious of my continued connection to Michael. Perhaps someone had seen us together, or maybe Shed had me followed. I never discovered exactly how she found out, but the impact was immediate and devastating. I received a call from Margaret Winters, my grandmother's lawyer. Someone's been inquiring about the trust, she said without preamble. Attempting to access information using your social security number and other personal details. The next day, Carol Martin, my father's secretary of 20 years, and someone I'd always considered an ally, called me in tears. I'm so sorry, Allison, she sobbed. Victoria found my emails to you. She said if I didn't tell her everything, she'd make sure Richard fired me without a reference. I have 3 kids in college. I couldn't risk it. Carol had been secretly sending me company updates, believing I'd been unfairly terminated. Now, Victoria knew we were still in contact. What exactly did you tell her? I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. Everything, Carol whispered. About the emails, about you asking about old financial records, and about your meetings with Michael Turner. The betrayal stung, but I couldn't blame Carol. Victoria was a master at finding people's pressure points. I immediately warned Michael and Rachel, but it was already too late. That night, my apartment was broken into while I was meeting with Michael. My laptop was stolen, along with all my handwritten notes and the flash drive containing copies of incriminating documents. Even my grandmother's letter was taken, a particularly cruel touch that I knew was Victoria's doing. Michael's office suffered a similar fate. His computer was gone, filing cabinets emptied, research destroyed. Our entire investigation, months of careful work, vanished overnight. Worse, Rachel called in a panic the next morning. They're saying I've been manipulating accounts, she whispered. James is claiming he found evidence that I've been changing numbers in the system. They've put me on administrative leave while they investigate. We were being systematically dismantled. With Rachel locked out of the system, we lost our inside access to company records. With our evidence stolen, we had nothing to back up our claims. In desperation, I tried approaching my father directly. I went to the house on a Sunday when I knew Victoria and her children would be at their country club. Dad opened the door himself, surprise momentarily, softening his features before the familiar hardness returned. Allison, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you. Alone. He hesitated, then stepped aside. In his study, I tried to explain about the break-ins, about Victoria's manipulation, about James' embezzlement. Without evidence, my words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Do you hear yourself? Dad finally interrupted. Break-ins, conspiracy, embezzlement. You sound paranoid. Dad, please. I'm telling you the truth. Victoria is enough. He slammed his hand on the desk. Victoria has done nothing but try to include you in this family. She defended you after the Weber disaster. She suggested giving you another chance in a different department. She's lying to you. They all are. The front door opened and closed. Victoria's voice called out, "Richard? Whose car is that in the driveway?" Dad's expression shuddered completely. "I think you should leave." Victoria appeared in the doorway, her surprise at seeing me as manufactured as everything else about her. "Allison, what a unexpected pleasure." "I was just leaving," I said, rising from my chair. "Richard, is everything all right?" Victoria moved to my father's side, placing a proprietary hand on his shoulder. Allison was just sharing some concerns about the company. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh? What concerns?" "Apparently," Dad said with deadly calm, "you and James have been embezzling funds and stripping company assets. Also, you broke into her apartment to steal evidence of these crimes." Victoria's laugh was a marvel of practiced incredulity. "That's absurd! Richard, surely you don't believe this." Before my father could answer, I said, "I have proof, Dad." Or, "I did, before Victoria's thugs stole it." "Convenient," Victoria murmured. Dad rubbed his temples. "Allison, I think you need help, professional help." This vendetta against Victoria and her children has gone beyond reasonable. Victoria's expression transformed into one of pained concern. "Richard, I've been reluctant to mention this, but I've noticed Allison's behavior becoming increasingly erratic for some time. Remember how paranoid your sister became before she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder? Perhaps there's a genetic component we should consider." I stared at her in disbelief. My Aunt Linda had indeed struggled with bipolar disorder, but it was a closely guarded family secret. Victoria was using personal family history to gaslight my father about my mental health. "I'm not mentally ill," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying to protect you and the company." "Of course you are, darling," Victoria soothed, her eyes cold as ice. "We only want what's best for you. Perhaps a wellness retreat? There's an excellent facility in Arizona that specializes in stress and delusional disorders." She was trying to have me committed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. If she convinced my father I was mentally unstable, she could potentially gain control over any assets I might still have claim to. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. "I think you should go, Allison. We can discuss this another time, when you're feeling more yourself." As Victoria walked me to the door, she whispered, "I know about your meetings with Michael. If you continue this ridiculous investigation, I'll make sure Richard cuts you off completely. No more trust fund, no more family connection. Nothing." I drove away from my childhood home in tears, completely defeated. That night, I seriously considered giving up. Victoria had outmaneuvered us at every turn. She had my father completely under her control. Our evidence was gone, and Rachel was on the verge of losing her job. Perhaps I should take what assets I had and start over somewhere far away. I called Michael, ready to throw in the towel. "She's won," I said when he answered. "We have nothing, and she's convinced Dad am mentally unstable." Michael was silent for a long moment. "Do you know what your grandmother said to me when your father forced me out?" "Michael, there are some fights that are worth losing everything for. This is one of those fights, Allison. If we give up, Victoria wins everything the company your grandmother built, your father's legacy, your birthright. Is that what Catherine would want?" His words cut through my despair. Grandmother Catherine had been a fighter all her life. She wouldn't want me to surrender, especially not to someone like Victoria. "No," I said finally. "That's not what she would want. Then let's regroup. We've lost a battle, not the war. And I think it's time to call in our secret weapon." 3 years earlier, 2 weeks before she died, my grandmother Catherine had summoned me to her home. She was frail by then, confined to bed, but her mind remained razor-sharp. "Allison," she said, taking my hand in her paper-thin one, "I need to tell you something important, but you must promise to keep it absolutely secret." I promised, puzzled by her intensity. "Your father believes I left my Parker Enterprises shares to be divided between him and my charitable foundation. That's what my public will states." I nodded. It had been big news, half of grandmother's 30% stake going to charitable causes she'd supported throughout her life. That's not exactly what happened, she continued. I created a blind trust 3 years ago when Victoria married your father. The trust holds 31% of Parker Enterprises. 31, I interrupted. But you only owned 30%. A ghost of her familiar mischievous smile crossed her lips. I've been quietly acquiring additional shares for years. Your father never noticed. The point is, this trust has a single beneficiary. She squeezed my hand. You, Allison. When you turn 34, control of the trust transfers to you completely. I was stunned, speechless. My lawyer, Margaret Winters, has all the documentation. The trust is structured to be invisible until you choose to reveal it. Not even the company's board knows who controls those shares. But why the secrecy? Why not tell Dad? Catherine's expression hardened. Because I don't trust Victoria. I've seen women like her before, charming, calculating, and utterly ruthless. She married Richard for his money and position, and she'll destroy everything I've built if she can. Dad would never let that happen, I protested. Your father is blinded by a pretty face and the family she's given him to replace what he lost when your mother died. Her words were harsh but not unkind. He can't see what's happening. But you can, Allison. You've always seen people clearly. She made me promise to keep the trust secret until absolutely necessary. Power held in reserve is often more valuable than power flaunted, she said. I had turned 34 3 months before my father fired me from Parker Enterprises. The day after my disastrous confrontation with him and Victoria, I received a call from Margaret Winters. It's time, she said simply. In her office, Margaret revealed the full extent of Catherine's planning. The trust had been meticulously constructed to be untouchable by Victoria or my father. For 3 years, it had been administered by a professional management team with strict instructions to vote with the board on all matters, maintaining the illusion that those shares were still part of Catherine's charitable foundation. As of last week, Margaret explained, you have complete control of the trust and all its assets, including a 31% stake in Parker Enterprises, which makes me the largest individual shareholder. I realized, the implications dawning on me. Larger than your father's 26%, Margaret confirmed. Larger than Victoria's 12%, even when combined with her children's shares. The knowledge was dizzying. For weeks it'd been scrambling to find evidence of Victoria's schemes, when all along it held the ultimate power to stop her. Michael was ecstatic when I told him. Catherine, you magnificent old fox, he laughed. She outplayed them all from beyond the grave. We quickly developed a new strategy. With my controlling interest, I could force a board vote on any issue. I could demand full financial audits, launch investigations into Victoria's shell companies, even remove my father as CEO if necessary, though that was a nuclear option I hoped to avoid. But raw power wasn't enough. We needed to be smarter than Victoria, more strategic. Simply revealing my ownership would trigger immediate countermeasures from Victoria and her allies on the board. We need to gather new evidence, Michael advised. Even with controlling interest, you'll face resistance from board members loyal to your father. We need to make our case irrefutable. I announced publicly that I was moving to Chicago to pursue new opportunities, even going so far as to lease an apartment there and set up mail forwarding. In reality, I moved into a small rental under a different name just outside our city, where I could continue working with Michael and Margaret undetected. Rachel, still on administrative leave but not yet fired, became our eyes inside Parker Enterprises. Careful to avoid company computers and email systems, she used her personal phone to photograph documents and record conversations when possible. Michael activated his extensive network of industry contacts. Former clients, vendors, even competitors provided information about unusual Parker Enterprises activities, sudden contract terminations, unexpected supplier changes, properties sold at suspicious discounts. Margaret Winters was a revelation. At 72, she had lost none of her legal acumen and possessed a surprising talent for investigative work. She traced Victoria's past through public records, revealing a pattern we'd never suspected. Victoria Chapman, Victoria Reynolds, Victoria Sinclair, Margaret recited, laying out documents on her conference table. 3 identities, 3 wealthy husbands, 3 failed businesses. Victoria's history was a textbook case of systematic fraud. She would marry wealthy men, gradually gain control of their assets, then orchestrate business failures that left her with cash and property while her husbands took the blame. Her last husband, Jonathan Sinclair, committed suicide after his investment firm collapsed. Margaret continued grimly. The investigation found evidence of fraud, but by then, Victoria had vanished with millions in assets. 6 months later, she reappeared as Victoria Lane and met your father. The evidence against James was equally damning. Rachel discovered a complex scheme in which he'd been diverting funds through fake vendor accounts that ultimately led to his personal offshore holdings. Rebecca had been less sophisticated but no less criminal, simply collecting multiple salaries for positions that existed only on paper. As our new evidence mounted, we developed a plan for the company's upcoming anniversary party. It would be the perfect stage for our confrontation. The board would be there, major clients, industry press. If Victoria tried to deny everything, we'd have an audience of witnesses who couldn't be easily silenced. There was just one question left. Should I warn my father privately before the public revelation? He won't believe you, Michael warned. He didn't before, and Victoria has had months to strengthen her hold on him. But he's still my father, I argued. I can't ambush him without at least trying to make him understand. Michael's expression softened. I know. Just be prepared for him to choose her. Again. 1 week before the anniversary party, I made a final attempt to reach my father. I called his private line at an hour when I knew he'd be alone in his office. Allison. His voice held genuine surprise. I thought you were in Chicago. I need to see you, Dad. Alone. It's important. Life-changing important. There was a long pause. Is this about Victoria again? Yes, but I have real evidence this time. Documented proof of what she's been doing. Another silence. Then, fine, tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, my office. I arrived early, bringing only the most irrefutable evidence. Bank statements showing Jameis embezzlement, documentation of Victoria's previous identities and bankrupted husbands, proof of the shell company's shed created to siphon Parker Enterprises' assets. Dad was already there, looking older than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his hair grayer. For a moment, seeing him alone behind his desk, he looked like the father I remembered from childhood, strong, confident, in command. You have 30 minutes, he said without preamble. Show me this evidence. I laid out the documents methodically, explaining each piece. Jameis' embezzlement scheme, demonstrated through bank transfers and fake vendor accounts. Victoria's history of fraud under different names. The shell companies she controlled that were acquiring Parker Enterprises' assets at fractions of their value. Dad remained silent, his expression unreadable as he examined each document. I felt a flicker of hope he was actually looking at the evidence, not dismissing it outright. There's one more thing you need to know, I said, taking a deep breath. Grandmother Catherine left me controlling interest in Parker Enterprises. 31% of the company shares are mine. His head snapped up, shock breaking through his composed facade. That's impossible. Catherine's shares were divided between me and her foundation. That was a cover. She created a blind trust 3 years ago with me as the beneficiary. I can prove it. I slid Margaret's legal documentation across the desk. I've been the largest shareholder for 3 months now. He stared at the trust documents, his hand trembling slightly as he turned the pages. Why wouldn't she tell me? She didn't trust Victoria. And she was right not to. Dad sat back in his chair, looking suddenly exhausted. Why are you showing me this now? You could have taken control of the company months ago. Because despite everything, you're my father. I wanted to give you the chance to fix this yourself, without public humiliation. Something shifted in his eyes' recognition. Perhaps even respect. For a moment, I thought E'd finally broken through. Then his office door opened and Victoria walked in. Richard, I brought you that report you. She stopped abruptly, seeing me. Allison! What a surprise! I thought you were in Chicago. I invited her. Dad said, his tone neutral. She has some concerns about the company she wanted to share. Victoria's eyes darted to the documents spread across the desk. What are those? Evidence, I said, holding her gaze. Of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft, committed by you, James, and Rebecca. Victoria laughed, the sound brittle and false. Richard, surely you're not taking this seriously. It looks quite thorough, Dad said quietly. Bank records, corporate filings, property transfers. And apparently my mother left Allison controlling interest in the company. Victoria went very still, her carefully constructed facade slipping for just an instant, revealing the calculating mind behind it. Then she recovered, moving to Dad's side, placing her hand on his shoulder in that possessive way she had. Richard, darling, think about what you're saying. Do you really believe your own mother would go behind your back and give control of your company to Allison? After the Weber disaster? After all her failures? The documents seem legitimate, Dad said, but I could hear doubt creeping into his voice. Of course they do, Victoria said soothingly. Allison has always been creative. Remember those stories she used to write as a child? Such an imagination. She turned to me, eyes glittering. Did Michael Turner help you fabricate these? Has always been bitter about being forced out. Nothing is fabricated, I insisted. Every document is authentic and can be verified. Victoria sighed dramatically. Richard, this is clearly an elaborate attempt to drive a wedge between us. Allison has never accepted me as part of the family. Now she's resorting to forgery and slander. She began to cry, tears that could be turned on and off like a faucet. I've tried so hard to be a mother to her, to include her in our family. I defended her after every mistake. And this is how she repays us with vicious lies. Dad's expression hardened. The moment of connection between us evaporated as if it had never existed. He gathered the documents and thrust them back at me. I think you should leave, Allison. Dad, please, now. Before I call security. Victoria's tears vanished as soon as Dad turned away. She leaned close to me, her voice a venomous whisper. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. When I'm finished with you, you won't have a penny to your name or a friend left in this city. I gathered my documents with shaking hands. This isn't over. Yes. She smiled coldly. It is. As I left the building, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. How did it go? I could only respond with 3 words. He chose her. That night was the lowest point of my life. I sat alone in my rented apartment, surrounded by evidence that no one who mattered would believe. My father had rejected me again, chosen Victoria over the truth, over his own daughter, over the evidence in front of his eyes. For hours, I cycled through despair, rage, and hopelessness. I considered abandoning everything, selling my shares, moving far away, starting a new life where the name Parker meant nothing. Then my phone rang. It was Margaret Winters. Allison, I just received notification that your father is attempting to challenge the trust. Victoria's lawyers have filed an emergency petition, claiming Catherine was not of sound mind when she created it. Can they do that? They can try, Margaret said, and I could hear the steel in her voice. But Catherine Parker was no fool. She had 3 independent medical evaluations conducted before creating the trust, specifically to prevent this kind of challenge. She also recorded video testimony explaining her decisions. So, the trust is safe. Absolutely. But this confirms what we suspected Victoria is making her move. According to my sources, she's also calling emergency board meetings, attempting to push through resolutions before the anniversary party. What kind of resolutions? The kind that would dilute existing shares by issuing new ones, primarily to board members loyal to her. It won't work. We have enough allies on the board to block it, but she's getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I thought about Victoria's threat, about my father's rejection, about all the years I'd spent trying to earn his respect and approval. It's time, I said finally. No more warnings, no more private confrontations. At the anniversary party, we end this once and for all. Michael and Rachel came over immediately. Until 3 in the morning, we finalized our plan, anticipating Victoria's potential countermoves, preparing responses to every scenario we could imagine. As they were leaving, Michael paused at the door. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Allison, not just for fighting back, but for trying to save your father first. He doesn't want to be saved, I said bitterly. Maybe not. But you gave him the chance. That counts for something. As I closed the door behind them, I realized Michael was right. I had done everything possible to protect my father from public humiliation. What happened next was his choice, not mine. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, without nightmares or anxiety. The confrontation was coming, but I was finally ready for it. The 15th anniversary celebration of Parker Enterprises was nothing short of spectacular. My father had spared no expense $2 million for a single evening of self-congratulation. The grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel had been transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and power, with ice sculptures, champagne fountains, and a 20-piece orchestra. The guest list included everyone who mattered in our industry: board members, major clients, potential investors, industry press. It was exactly the audience we needed. I arrived fashionably late, dressed in a midnight blue gown that had been my mother's favorite color. As I entered, conversations stuttered and paused. People turned to stare. According to the rumor mill, I was supposed to be in Chicago, licking my wounds after being fired from the family business. James spotted me first, nearly dropping his champagne flute. He grabbed Rebecca's arm, whispered urgently in her ear. She whipped around, eyes widening in alarm. They both pushed through the crowd toward Victoria, who was holding court near the main stage. I watched her face as they delivered the news of my arrival. For a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across her features before her social mask slipped back into place. She glanced in my direction, raising her champagne glass in mock salute before turning back to her conversation as if my presence meant nothing. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slightly too bright smile, the way her eyes kept darting toward the ballroom entrance. She was expecting Michael and waiting for our move. I circulated through the crowd, accepting condolences for my unfortunate departure from Parker Enterprises, deflecting questions about my supposed relocation to Chicago. All the while, I watched Victoria maneuvering my father through the room, keeping him surrounded by board members, loyal to her, never allowing him a clear line of sight to where I stood. At precisely 9 o'clock, my father took the stage for his anniversary speech. The room fell silent as he surveyed his assembled guests with satisfaction. 15 years ago, he began, Parker Enterprises was just a dream. A small operation running out of a converted warehouse with 3 employees and more ambition than capital. It heard this speech 100 times the mythology of Richard Parker, self-made man, who built an empire through sheer force of will. No mention of grandmother Catherine's startup capital, or the connections her reputation provided, or Michael Turner's crucial early partnership. Tonight, we celebrate not just 15 years of growth and success, but the future of Parker Enterprises. A future that looks brighter than ever thanks to the talented leadership team we've assembled. He gestured to Victoria, James, and Rebecca, who joined him on stage to enthusiastic applause. My wife, Victoria, whose financial acumen has transformed our acquisition strategy. My son, James, whose innovative approach to client relations has secured our market position for years to come. And my daughter, Rebecca, whose event planning skills are on magnificent display tonight. The ballroom erupted in applause again. Victoria beamed, the picture of the proud corporate wife. James and Rebecca stood tall, basking in unearned praise. I waited for him to continue, to perhaps acknowledge other key team members. Instead, his gaze found me in the crowd, and something hard entered his expression. Some of you may be surprised to see my daughter Allison here tonight. She recently left Parker Enterprises to pursue other opportunities. Or so we thought. A nervous titter ran through the crowd. This was not part of the expected script for the evening. It seems Allison couldn't quite let go of the family business, despite her limited contributions to its success. The room went completely silent. Even those who had witnessed my humiliations at Parker Enterprises seemed shocked by this public attack. I tried to find a place for her, my father continued, his voice taking on a performative sadness. God knows I tried. But some people simply aren't cut out for the corporate world. My useless daughter couldn't even handle a simple job in the family business. Laughter rippled through sections of the crowd, uncomfortable, uncertain laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Victoria's smile widened. James and Rebecca exchanged smirks. This was the moment we had planned for. I moved toward the stage, my path clearing as guests stepped aside, sensing the dramatic confrontation building. A microphone stand had been set up at the front of the room for announcements later in the evening. I stopped beside it, waiting until my father noticed me. "Did you have something to add, Allison?" he asked, his tone mocking. "Actually, I do." I took the microphone, surveying the now silent crowd. For those who don't know me, I'm Allison Parker. Until recently, I worked at Parker Enterprises, where I was systematically sabotaged, undermined, and ultimately fired as part of a calculated plan orchestrated by Victoria Lane, or should I say Victoria Chapman, or Victoria Reynolds, or Victoria Sinclair. Victoria's smile froze on her face. My father frowned in confusion. "But that's not why I'm here tonight. I'm here because, as the owner of 31% of Parker Enterprises, I have some concerns about the company's current management." The room erupted in shocked whispers. My father stepped forward, reaching for a second microphone. "That's absurd. You don't own any part of Parker Enterprises." "I do, actually," I replied calmly. Grandmother Catherine left her shares, plus additional ones, Shed acquired over the years to me through a blind trust that matured on my 34th birthday. I've been the largest individual shareholder of Parker Enterprises for 3 months now. Victoria grabbed my father's arm, whispering urgently in his ear. He brushed her off, his face darkening with anger. "Even if that were true, which I doubt, it doesn't give you the right to disrupt our anniversary celebration with wild accusations." "You're right," I conceded. "So let me stick to documented facts." I nodded to Michael, who had positioned himself near the ballroom's audiovisual controls. The lights dimmed slightly, and the massive screens that had been displaying company highlights shifted to show financial records. These are bank statements showing systematic embezzlement from Parker Enterprises accounts over the past 4 years. The transfers were authorized by James Lane, using vendor accounts that, when traced, lead directly to his personal offshore holdings. James lunged for the microphone, but my father held him back, his expression thunderous. "This is slander," James shouted. "Those documents are forgeries." "They're authenticated bank records, obtained through legal channels during a financial audit I ordered as majority shareholder," I replied. "And they're just the beginning." The screens changed again, showing incorporation documents for a series of shell companies. These entities have been acquiring Parker Enterprises assets at significantly below market value for the past 3 years. All of them, despite different names and registered agents, trace back to a single beneficial owner, Victoria Lane. Victoria stepped forward, her composure cracking. "Richard, this is absurd. She's fabricated all of this to try to take control of your company." "Your company," I corrected. "Isn't that the end goal, Victoria?" "It has been from the beginning, hasn't it?" The screens shifted again, displaying news articles about business failures and bankruptcy filings. 3 husbands before my father. 3 successful businesses destroyed. 3 fortunes mysteriously disappeared. And 1 suicide, Jonathan Sinclair, who killed himself after his investment firm collapsed under allegations of fraud. Victoria's face went white. "Richard, she's twisting the facts. My previous marriages were hunting expeditions. I finished for her. Find a wealthy, successful man, marry him, isolate him from friends and family, take control of his finances, then strip his assets and disappear before the consequences hit." Rebecca was backing away from her mother now, looking uncertain for the first time. Several board members were huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. The industry reporters present were frantically taking notes. "My father was next on your list," I continued, "and you almost succeeded. You turned him against his oldest friend and partner, Michael Turner. You isolated him from colleagues who might have noticed what was happening. You convinced him to trust you and your children with key positions in the company. And then you began systematically looting Parker Enterprises from the inside." My father stood rigid, his expression unreadable. "These are serious accusations, Allison. If they're false, every document we're showing has been verified by independent forensic accountants." I interrupted. "They've been shared with the SEC and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and they've been distributed to every board member and major shareholder in this room." I looked directly at Victoria. "It's over. The transfers, the embezzlement, the asset stripping, all of it stops now." Victoria's composed facade shattered completely. "You stupid little bitch," she hissed, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Do you have any idea what I've had to endure?" Years of pretending to care about your father's boring business, listening to his pathetic stories about building something meaningful. He was nothing but a stepping stone, just like the others. The room went deadly silent. Every eye turned to my father, who stood as if turned to stone, staring at his wife of 10 years as if seeing her for the first time. "Victoria," he said, his voice hollow. "What are you saying?" She seemed to realize suddenly that she was still on stage, her words broadcast to hundreds of witnesses. Her expression shifted, a desperate attempt to reclaim her role as the wronged party. "Richard, she's manipulating all of us, can't you see? She's trying to drive us apart because she's jealous of our family, of what we've built together." "What we've built?" Rebecca's voice cut through the tension, surprisingly clear. "Mom, those bank accounts in the Caymans. You told me they were Dad's idea for tax purposes." Victoria whirled on her daughter. "Be quiet, Rebecca. And the property transfers," Rebecca continued, backing further away. "You said it was just restructuring to protect the company's assets. You said Dad approved everything." It was the final confirmation no one had expected, Victoria's own daughter inadvertently confirming the allegations. Security personnel appeared at the edges of the stage, summoned by a signal from Michael. 2 police officers entered the ballroom, moving purposefully through the stunned crowd. Victoria's eyes darted around the room, calculating escape routes. Finding none, she turned to my father one last time. "Richard, please. Everything I did was for us, for our future." My father looked at her with empty eyes. "There is no us anymore." He turned away from her, addressing the shocked audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these revelations, the remainder of tonight's celebration is cancelled. Board members, please remain for an emergency meeting. Everyone else, I apologize for the disruption." As security escorted Victoria from the stage, she passed close to where I stood. "This isn't over," she whispered. "I still have resources you can't imagine." "Actually," I replied quietly, "the federal agents waiting in the lobby might disagree. Turns out financial fraud across state lines is taken quite seriously." Her face contorted with fury, but before she could respond, she was led away, James following in similar custody. Rebecca, having unwittingly incriminated her mother, was permitted to leave on her own, though I suspected she wouldn't escape legal consequences entirely. As the ballroom slowly emptied, my father remained on stage, looking suddenly old and lost. For a moment, I considered going to him, offering some word of comfort. But the wounds between us were still too raw, his cruel words from earlier still echoing in my ears. Instead, I nodded to Michael and Rachel, who had been standing ready at different points in the room, and made my way toward the exit. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of salvaging the company, conducting thorough audits, reassuring clients and investors. Tonight, I had done what needed to be done. As I reached the ballroom doors, I heard my father's voice, surprisingly close behind me. "Allison." I turned. He stood a few feet away, his face a complex mixture of emotions, shame, regret, anger, confusion. "We should talk," he said simply. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was, perhaps, a beginning. "Tomorrow," I replied. "At the office." "Your office." He nodded once, understanding the message. I was giving him the dignity of handling the aftermath in his own space, on his own terms. But things would never return to the way they were before. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting slightly from my shoulders. Victoria hadn't destroyed everything after all. Some things, once broken, could perhaps be rebuilt stronger, more honest, and ultimately more valuable than before. The 6 months following the anniversary party confrontation were among the most challenging of my life. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Parker family drama. Daughter exposes stepmother's fraud, screamed the headlines. Business publications ran detailed analyses of the scandal, while tabloids focused on the personal betrayal angle. Victoria, James, and Rebecca faced federal charges for securities fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft. Victoria's bail was set at $10 million, which she somehow managed to post, disappearing to one of her overseas properties while awaiting trial. James, denied bail due to flight risk, remained in custody. Rebecca, facing lesser charges due to her cooperation with investigators, was released under house arrest. The immediate business fallout was severe. Parker Enterprises stock plummeted 30% in the week following the revelations. Major clients paused their contracts pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Several board members resigned, fearing liability or simply wanting to distance themselves from the scandal. In the midst of this chaos, my father and I began the painful process of rebuilding both the company and our relationship. The morning after the party, I arrived at his office as promised. He was already there, looking like he hadn't slept at all, his desk covered with files and financial reports, evidence of a night spent confronting the full extent of Victoria's betrayal. "How much did we lose?" I asked, skipping any pretense of small talk. "Preliminary estimates put it at around 60 million, he replied, his voice hollow. They were thorough. "Well, recover what we can," I said. "Margaret is already tracing the money flows, and the FBI has frozen their known accounts." Dad nodded absently, staring at the papers before him without really seeing them. I was a fool. It was as close to an apology as I expected. "Yes, you were," I agreed, without heat. "The question is, what now?" That conversation established the pattern for our interactions in the months that followed, businesslike, focused on saving the company, with personal reconciliation taking a back seat to professional necessity. We worked side by side without directly addressing the wounds between us, a ceasefire rather than true peace. Michael Turner returned to Parker Enterprises as Chief Operating Officer, his experience and steady leadership proving invaluable during the crisis. Rachel Chen, vindicated completely, was promoted to Chief Financial Officer, where her meticulous attention to detail helped us untangle Victoria's web of financial deceit. Together, the three of us implemented a comprehensive recovery plan. We reached out personally to every major client, providing complete transparency about what had happened and our plans moving forward. We restructured the board, bringing in experienced outside directors with reputations for integrity. We ordered a full forensic audit of every department, every account, every transaction from the past 5 years. Slowly, painfully, Parker Enterprises began to stabilize. By the 4-month mark, we had recovered nearly 40% of the stolen assets. Stock prices had rebounded to 80% of their pre-scandal levels. Clients cautiously renewed their contracts, reassured by our transparency and decisive actions. Throughout this period, my father and I maintained our professional détente, working effectively together while keeping emotional distance. But as the immediate crisis subsided, the unaddressed personal issues between us became increasingly difficult to ignore. The breaking point came during a late night at the office, 6 months after the confrontation. We were reviewing a particularly complex series of transactions Victoria had orchestrated, trying to determine if the assets could be recovered. "She was very clever," Dad said, almost admiringly. "This layered approach to hiding the money trails, it would have worked if you hadn't exposed it when you did." "I tried to tell you months earlier," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I tried to show you evidence. You chose not to see it." He was silent for a long moment. "Yes, I did. Why?" The question that had haunted me for years finally escaped. "Why her over me? Over the truth? Over everything we built?" Dad set down the file he'd been holding, removing his reading glasses to rub his eyes. He suddenly looked every one of his 64 years. "After your mother died, I was lost. Sarah had been the emotional center of our family. Without her, I didn't know how to connect with you, how to be what you needed. It was easier to bury myself in work." "I know all that," I said. "But that doesn't explain Victoria." Victoria made everything simple. She managed the house, organized social events, handled all the aspects of life I'd neglected. She created the illusion of a family again. He shook his head. "And she was very, very good at making me believe what she wanted me to believe. She turned you against Michael, against me, against anyone who might have seen through her." Yes, he met my gaze directly for perhaps the first time since the confrontation. "I trusted the wrong people, Allison. I believed lies because they were comfortable, and rejected truth because it was painful. It cost me nearly everything." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an admission, a recognition of his failures and their consequences. It was a start. Over the following weeks, something shifted subtly between us. The professional conversations began to include personal elements. He asked about my apartment, my friends outside work, my life beyond Parker Enterprises. I inquired about his health, his golf game, the hobbies had abandoned during Victoria's influence, small steps, tentative attempts at rebuilding what had been broken. One morning, he appeared at my office door, holding 2 coffee cups. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, accepting the offered coffee prepared exactly as I liked it, something the old Richard Parker would never have known or remembered. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a seat across from me, "about the future of Parker Enterprises." "What about it?" "I'm 64 years old. Before all this happened, Victoria had me convinced I needed to maintain control indefinitely, that no one else could possibly run the company properly." He offered a self-deprecating smile. "Recent events have somewhat undermined that assumption." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps it's time to consider a transition plan, a gradual shift in leadership over the next few years." I studied him carefully. "To me, you're the majority shareholder. You saved the company from disaster. You've proven yourself more than capable." He paused. "And you're a Parker. That still counts for something." It was the closest thing to paternal pride I'd heard from him in years. I felt an unexpected lump in my throat. "We'd need to discuss the details," I said, trying to maintain professional composure. "Timeline, structure, public messaging. Of course, no rush." He rose to leave, then hesitated. I was thinking. It's been ages since I had a decent meal that wasn't at a business function. "There's that Italian place your mother used to love. Maybe we could have dinner there sometime." Not to discuss business. The reference to my mother was deliberate, an acknowledgement of a shared past that Victoria had nearly erased, an invitation to remember who we had been to each other before everything fell apart. "I'd like that," I said simply. As he turned to leave, I added, "Dad, thank you for the coffee." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Tomorrow, same time." "Tomorrow," I agreed. After he left, I sat for a long time, staring out my office window at the city below. The company wasn't fully recovered yet. My relationship with my father remained fragile, the trust between us still being rebuilt one coffee, one conversation at a time. But for the first time in years, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future, both for Parker Enterprises and for the broken family attempting to heal alongside it. Victoria had nearly destroyed everything my grandmother had built, everything my mother had valued, everything I had worked for. But in the end, she had failed. Some ties, it seemed, were stronger than even the most calculated betrayal. Some foundations, once laid, could withstand even the most determined attempts to undermine them. And some things, once truly broken, could indeed be rebuilt not as they were before, but perhaps as something stronger, more honest, and ultimately more valuable than what had been lost. Family was worth fighting for, even when they had hurt you the most. What would you do if someone you trusted betrayed you like Victoria, betrayed Allison's family? Would you seek revenge or try to rebuild? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might need to hear that sometimes. Standing your ground is the only way forward. Thank you for listening to my story today, and remember, sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage.